The capacity of people to do good and evil is a social construct and it's relative. Selfishness comes in many forms, protecting ourselves, the ones we love, and the institutions. There are three things I'm going to do in this debate. First is on responses. The second, how do people evaluate social, political, and economic situations? And third, why inequality is much easier to sustain on opposition. If we prove that we have better social, political, and economic benefits on the macro, we win this debate. A few easy responses. The first is, the foundation of democracy and constitutions were born from the natural skepticisms against the government. A more radicalized version of this is exactly what we're fighting for. The second, they say that it's going to be like the bad actions are not going to be an evidence of moral corruption on their side because it's going to cue them for a chance to change. However, when they say that they don't see people as perfect but claim that our world is pure evil, they're not being comparative because that's not the case, right? Kuyasek already explained how the higher burden of proof is inherently more robust, meaning people are still likely to be good in that particular area. Second, cooperation happens much slower, but that's already our trade-off. Opposition does not have any trade-off at all. The third response here is just, it's really unclear what intrinsically good looks like. LO just says, it's not going to be the Lulu. But what filters or checks do people have to not get wrecked in this particular instance? Not just in status quo, right? In the world that they are trying to actually defend. They can't have their cake and eat it too. The second, again, we are willing to trade off kumbaya happy vibes, right? Society is more serious, less collaborative, less communal, all good. People are more insular and own communities may be more fragmented, but that's better than a tokenistic or unstrategic partnerships where people get taken advantage of. For example, developed states wreck developing nations, rich taking from the poor, and slavery and all that stuff. And lastly, the higher burden of proof as a safeguard is already good for accountability. This is going to be very important in my extension later on the social comparative because I don't think that they really engaged on this particular metric. They only assumed that a case that we said was never really true to begin with. The first extension, people evaluate situations on a worst case to worst case basis. In general, what does this look like? Two things. First, you hear stuff from somebody. Let's see what sort of twist will happen that will veer in the wrong direction. Second, if this politician fails in their promise, so many livelihoods will be in danger. So let's strengthen our civil society groups, for example. How does this still converge in the median outlook? The skepticism acts as a cushion to the way people hold out their expectations. There are three comparatives of manifestation. The first on the social. Meeting a new person for a lot of people is going to be slow, sure, but the trust that is built is going to be robust. Why is betrayal going to be less likely? And this is something they really need to respond to because in a world where it's going to be intrinsically good, a lot of taking advantage can happen. Two things. First, people work so hard to earn one's trust, right? Of course, we're not going to talking about serial killers, for example, who want to, befriend you, right? For example, so we're going to be talking about normal people. Because the second is there are less support systems outside of this one that you built, meaning you have more incentives to be loyal and not just, have so many friends that you're not really sure who you're going to have a bonding with, for example. The impact is just the better incentives of maintaining and earning these particular friendships. Second, on the political, voting is going to be much more secure. Why is it less likely to lead to this nihilism, it doesn't matter who we vote, that they may try to push? Two things. First is, self-interested people want the best from the government services because they benefit from this. The second, you have politicians who went through this particular test, who went through this higher burden because it is the dominant norm in society. They cannot leverage this trust when they gain this because two things. First, checks and balances institutions are strong for the very reason that this dominant norm exists. And second, benevolence isn't expected over results from the populace who voted you. So politicians can't rely on being nice anymore. And the third, on the economy, when taking jobs, people are more inclined to scrutinize contracts, terms, even for those with lower levels of education. Two reasons. First, they know the extent of being exploited because this is something that's been instilled to them in the very first place. Under their side, you're gonna want to think that, I need to be able to grit through this job and just grind because I'm gonna get out of this eventually. So second, even if they do get exploited, because this is a worst case scenario that happens for both sides, you take the contract with the full intentions of maximizing your time instead of expecting your boss to save you from poverty because you think you got hired because they wanted to help you. That is delusional. The macro is simple. There's more protection in terms of economic security because of the behavior of those desperate people. And just on this idea of over-policing from scrutinizing for personal benefits, right? It's going to be a very big material. Two things. First, the public have strength in numbers. They'll likely go against these institutions once this particular thing is going to be enforced, right? Because when you are looking at people as intrinsically evil, the ones that are leading you need to make sure that those people are going to be kept in check. Second, privacy is very dear to people. They'll look at the terms and conditions more, unlike people just, scrolling through it, clicking accept without knowing the ramifications of like the data stealing, for example. So again, safety and security, I don't think that their comparative really last in this particular instance. Before my second, I'll take a point. Okay, second extension. All right, so beyond naivety and gullibility, inequality is easier to sustain in opposition's world. Inequality exists on either side, but the extent and sustainability of it is worse on theirs. How does this happen? Three things. First, philanthropists position themselves to always be deserving of the benefit of the doubt. This is exactly the mechanism that they claim, and these particular things only apply for those who are capable of giving back eventually, of quote unquote repenting in front of the public. Because for the people who has done wrong, even though you might see them as intrinsically good, you don't expect much from them because they are not capable of doing the same amount of good as these particular rich people or people in power. Second, those in power are the only ones who can reinforce these narratives, meaning that they're going to be able to lessen the damage on their reputation, because this particular dominant norm of being intrinsically good is something that you can be forgiven for even if you fuck up. And the third is they can frame their criminal record as just being something of the past, even though in political institutions and in like the corporate side of businesses, this is a really heavy red flag. When you see people as intrinsically good, the way at which that these people are going to look at it is say that, sure, they were a criminal before, but at the very least, they can change, and if they're willing to change, they're going to be much better. That means it's like a very delusional outlook. On our side, even if you're going to get that, it's less likely for them to last in the first place. And just the main case is just you're less likely to get these particular things in the first place. We prove everything proposed.